Hello everyone and welcome back to the video. Some of you guys might know what a deathball composition, but a lot of you guys might be completely new to the term. The name kind of gives it away. It's a composition in which our opponent has no chance to break this, no matter what they throw at us, no matter what they try, they're not going to break our composition. We're going to sit in one area and win every single fight and slowly push till our opponent gives up and refuses to play on any further. This is a great strategy to use in maps that are naturally limited in space, like Arena and Black Forest, and so raids in those maps aren't really the go-to option, and so instead we need to focus on a massive push that is slow but steady. It can't be stopped, and we can slowly inch our way over to our opponent's map and take over his base. This is also useful in team games where you have a lot of gold to access, and the trade route is a big part of the win condition. So you want to protect our trade, keep the gold high, and then slowly push towards our opponent's trade and take that out. However, deathball compositions can also be used in 1v1 games, even 1v1 open maps. Simply if you want to wall off the sides and push down a certain hill in the middle, or just kind of control a certain area of the map that's very key and your opponent doesn't want to give up. So in this case, a deathball composition can be very important. And so you guys might be wondering, how do we achieve the best deathball composition? There's a lot of civilization. It's hard to kind of figure this out, but don't worry, I've done all the work for you. In this video, I'm going to go ahead and show you guys the best deathball composition for every single civilization in Age of Empires 2. So no matter what you play, there's going to be something in this video for you to help you guys out. All right, let's go ahead and hop right in. Actually baited a little bit. Before we hop in, I'm going to go ahead and shout out my secondary YouTube channel. On this main channel, I'm doing mainly guides and other types of content AoE related. But if you want to see pure high-level gameplay, every single day I'm posting one of my games on my secondary channel, Hera gameplay, link in the description. Make sure to check that out and subscribe there. We've got over 5,000 subscribers. It's going strong. Make sure to check that out if you want to see some AoE2 gameplay. All right, without further ado, let's hop into the list for real this time. Alright, starting off in alphabetical order here, we've got the Aztecs. For Aztecs, it's quite simple. We want to go for Garland War Infantry. Garland War giving +4 attack to all your infantry, and you have a wide variety of infantry that you can go for. Champions, Jaguar Warriors, and Pikes are a great mix to counter all kinds of units. And then to actually have a push, we're going to use Monks, Siege Onagers, and Trebuchets. Trebuchets to kill buildings, Monks to convert problematic units and bombard cannons, and Siege Onager to kill everything else. If they come too close, the infantry is there to buffer. Next up, we've got the Bengalis. Now, Bengalis have really strong monks, so I really want to make use of those, and to supplement the monks, we're going to go with either elephant archers or rathas. And then as far as our siege unit goes, we're simply going to go ahead and use the trebuchet. You have access to halberdier if you need them as well for this kind of composition, so make sure to use them if necessary. Moving on now to the Berbers, we've got a quite powerful army here. It's going to be the Camel Archer, the Heavy Scorpion, and the Bombard Cannon. Camel Archer has amazing DPS, so we're not actually worried about their Paladin or anything running in, because the Camel Archer has insane DPS and can deal with those heavy cavalry. Heavy Scorpion will take out units like skirmishers and halberdiers very effectively and just add extra DPS in the back. And Bombard Cannons is a nice way to take out buildings and also hit more skirmishers if needed. Alright, moving on now to Bohemians. We've got the classic, at this point, Hoofnies Halberdier composition, but to supplement that, we're also going to throw in Hand Cannoneer to deal with any infantry, and also rely on our food monks. Remember, they only cost food in the late game if you get the unique tech, and we're going to use that to kind of anchor our composition. It's a very slow push composition, but it's almost impossible to break. Next up, we've got an absolute classic here. We've been playing the Britons for about 20 years now, and their composition remains somewhat the same. We're going to rely on the longbow with 12 range and massive DPS from the backline, and then halberdier in front to defend against the cavalry, and then trebuchets with Warwolf, of course, incredibly strong at taking out buildings and units alike. Extremely strong composition, great on those closed maps. Next up, we got the Bulgarians. Now for the Bulgarians, I like to keep it rather simple. It's simply going to be Conic, Siege Onager. Nice and quick there down the center. You have a ton of options there. With the Conic, if it dies, it spawns a little Conic to kind of buffer those SO. If you're scared of cavalry, feel free to mix in Halberdier as well. And of course, trebuchets to take out buildings will be our siege of choice. Next up, we've got the Burgundians, and for Burgundians, it's going to be the Coutelier or the Coutelier with hand cannon behind it, and of course bombard cannon for the siege unit to take out units and buildings alike. And I will also mention for Burgundians that you have the Flemish Revolution that you can always rely on for that last big push. Moving on now to the Burmese, we've got Arambai and Halberdier. Arambai are actually really good in mass. When you have like 50 Arambai in the late game, they do massive damage, and they do kind of like an area of effect, like kind of a Maginot Shots effect, because of just how many Arambai you can have, and if you shoot at the same target, their poor accuracy will spread, and so you actually do a ton of damage to a variety of units. And so combining that with Halberdier to defend against mass cavalry, followed up with monks and bombard cannons, you've got a really scary comp with the Burmese. I'll also mention you can go with their battle elephants, which are incredibly strong. So in case you don't want to go with the Rambai, you can mix in some battle elephants instead. Both are great options. Next up, we've got the Byzantines. Byzantines are going to rely on their cataphracts and arbalest with the bomber cannons behind. You can also use your monks, and I highly recommend you use your monks with Byzantine, because not only do you get amazing conversions with monks in the late game, they also heal 4 times faster. So monks in the composition are going to be a key component for the Byzantines. I'm also going to mention now, before I forget, that bomber towers are an incredibly powerful tool for slow pushing. Make sure to use bomber towers with any civilization that gets them, if you can afford to mix some in if you have extra stone. Bomber towers are amazing. I'm not going to mention them specifically for every civilization, but every civ that gets them, they are good for slow pushing. Keep that in mind. Moving on now, we've got the Celts, and Celts are known for their siege, and we're going to definitely make use of that. I recommend you go with halberdier and woad raiders, a mix of those 2 units for the buffer, the infantry line. And then for siege, I recommend siege ram and siege onager. Those are your best options, because siege ram to dive in with the woads can be a great idea, and then siege onager, if you want to camp some trebs and have the halb nearby, is also a great idea. Both can work in certain situations. Next up, we got the Chinese, and for Chinese, I honestly recommend to make use of their Scorpion/Chukunu backline. Mix of heavy Scorpion and Chukunu can be fantastic. And then as far as their front line, I recommend just going with Cavalier. It's not the most impressive, but it does the job. And then you can also mix in some siege ram or some trebuchets to take out the buildings. Moving on now for the Cumans, we've got the Kipchak Paladin, super high mobility composition. Of course, 2 really fast units, really powerful units. You can just run around with 20 Paladin, 20 Kipchak, and absolutely take out town centers, take out all kinds of villagers, and run around and become that death ball with a little bit of mobility attached to it. And if you want to go ahead and do a little bit of a slower push, you have siege ram and trebuchets that you can use to push down buildings and just camp them with your Kipchak Paladin combo. Both ways work. It's a bit of a hybrid between raiding comp and death ball comp there. Next up, we've got the Dravidians. Now for Dravidians, I highly recommend you make use of their Elephant Archers. It's probably their best unit in the late game. You have the Urumi Swordsman, which isn't bad to mix in, but as far as the front line, it's probably going to be Halberdier as the main choice, but Urumi Swordsman to be mixed in can be also a good choice sometimes. And then for your Siege Onager, Treb/Bomber Cannon, those are going to be great options for that backline siege. Alright, next up we got one of my favorites. We've got the Ethiopians. Highly underrated siege civilization. We normally think them as an archer civ, but they are a absolute beast of a civilization in late game. Torsion engine, Esso, bomber cannons, and halberdier as the buffer is going to be your best composition with Ethiopians. Long range siege that does a ton of splash damage is just so scary, and halberdier just to buffer those is going to be fantastic. I also recommend mixing in some arbalest if need be to kind of complete your composition here. Alright, next up we got the Franks, another kind of hybrid between a death ball and mobility. We've got Paladin, Heavy Scorp, and Treb. I honestly recommend you camp your trebuchets with Heavy Scorpion and maybe some bomber cannons to mix in with your trebuchets. That's kind of your main siege/DPS composition, and then keep your Paladin around to swoop in if they ever get too close to your siege. It's a very nice way to play Franks if you need to slow push. Alright, next up we got the Goths. Now, it's kind of hard to figure out a deathball comp with Goths because they're inherently a very heavily raiding reliant civilization, very spam oriented, but I find Huskro Halberdier with Heavy Scorpion and Bomber Cannon behind to be a pretty good composition, and I think there's very little weaknesses to this composition if you can actually get here. So Huskro Halberdier with Heavy Scorpion Bomber Cannon typically does the job with Goths for the slow push. Alright, next up we got the Gurjaras, and this is a literal death ball here with the Chakram Thrower, Heavy Camel, both units doing incredible DPS. Heavy Camel going to be great at defending the cavalry. Chakram Thrower can melt everything else. And then for siege and to help out against enemy hand cannoneer or whatnot, we've got the Bombard Cannon. Very flexible, of course, at the backline. Following that up, we've got Hindustani. Hindustani going to rely also on their camels, in this case Imperial Camel, but we're also going to mix in some 9 range hand cannoneer with that Imperial Age unique tech, and we're also going to use Bomber Cannon for the siege. You'll notice by now that Bomber Cannons are going to be the siege of choice if the civilization does get it. Trebuchets are nice, but Bomber Cannons in my opinion are just a little bit more flexible, a little bit more usable. Next up, we've got the Huns. And now Huns are also going to rely a little bit on the raiding. It's going to be another hybrid kind of composition. We've got Elite Tarkin, Heavy CA, and Siege Ram. The point of this composition is just to dive into your opponent's buildings and take them out incredibly fast with the Tarkin bonus damage and the Siege Ram to soak up all the arrow fire and also take out the buildings. Heavy CA will be very cheap and very reliable as the backline DPS unit as well. Really strong composition there for the Huns. You can also go with Paladins, but I like the Tarkin a bit more because it has a bit more tankiness with the Pierce Armor and does extra damage to buildings buildings, which can be amazing at taking out castles and whatnot to push small areas. Next up, we've got the Incas. And Incas, you might not think of this unit too much in your actual games, but the Kamyuk is an absolute beast in the late game. Highly recommend you use the Kamyuk and Arbalest with some monks and trebs behind for your full composition with Incas. Kamyuks will shred pretty much everything that gets within range, and Arbalest just for that backline DPS can be great. Monks and trebuchets to round out that composition will be a great death ball for Incas. Next up, we got the Italians, and Italians are one of the few civilizations that don't rely on halberdier to take out cavalry. We've got the Genoese crossbow, and I recommend you pair the Genoese crossbow with the condottiero. Condottiero is great at tanking hand cannoneer, and they can tank skirmishers very nicely. So Genoese crossbows with condottiero will be a fantastic composition overall, and then just pair that up with monks and bombard cannons just to round out the composition as always. Next up, we've got the Japanese. Now, Japanese is one of the few civilizations that I can see a death ball using only trash units with siege. However, I think the best composition is halberdier and arbalest with onagers and trebs behind it. Remember, the trebuchets for Japanese with Katapuruto, the Imperial Age unique technology, they pack and unpack really fast. You can control the position, and if it gets dicey, just run back. You also get siege engineers, so your onagers are going to be pretty decent. And if you want to, save a little bit on gold, you can swap out arbalest for skirmishers. Both do a similar job anyways, so both can work, but I like arbalest a little bit more if I've got the gold to spare. It's just an overall better unit than the skirmisher. Alright, next up we've got Khmer. Now, Khmer is the top death ball civilization for sure. There's a couple options you have, but my favorite is going to be Heavy Scorpion, Battle Elephant with trebuchets as the backline, siege to destroy buildings, of course. But Battle Elephant, Heavy Scorpion is so strong. Heavy Scorp will thin out the halberdier, and Battle Elephant will kill literally everything else. An alternative option is going to be the Ballista Elephant that you can mix in. So Ballista Elephant, Hussar, Treb can also be a great composition at times. Both can be very solid. I really don't recommend you go Battle Elephant and Ballista Elephant though, because that's a little bit more susceptible to halberdier. So I prefer Heavy Scorp, Battle Elephant overall as a composition. Next up, we've got the Koreans, and for Koreans, I like to go with SO, so siege onagers and wagons. That's gonna be my main composition, but I also need halberdier just to kind of protect against heavy cavalry. So siege onagers with 10 range using that unique tech and siege engineers, plus wagons, which are incredibly tanky and strong, plus halberdier, and it's literally the perfect composition. Mix in some trebs or bomber cannons to take out buildings, and you're golden. Next up, we got the Lithuanians, and for the Lithuanians, I'd like to go with Lightus, Hand Cannoneer, and Bomber Cannon. Lightus do so much damage, especially if you can pick up a couple relics, and then Hand Cannoneer just to cover the Halb weakness, plus Bomber Cannons to deal with some backline units, some Arbalest and stuff, and also take out buildings. It's a great composition. Moving swiftly along here, we've got the Magyars, and Magyars are going to be another civilization that relies slightly on their mobility, so it's going to be a hybrid mobility deathball comp. We've got Paladin, Heavy CA, and Trebuchets to round it off. I'd like to recommend you just run in with the Paladin and Heavy CA, do as much damage as possible, and let the Trebs fire at the back line. But if running in isn't a possibility, if it's too risky, then just camp your Trebuchet with the Heavy CA and keep the Paladin close by in case other units get too close. Alright, moving on, we've got the Malay. Now for Malay, the deathball composition is going to be Karambits. 400 of them. Just kidding, obviously. The deathball comp for Malay is going to be Battle Elephants. You get them really cheap, 40% off, and then Arbalest plus monks and bomber cannons in the back line. Battle Elephants, they tend to make a great meat shield, and I think Arbalest behind them just covers the weakness of halberdier. Monks and bomber cannons, of course, will round off the composition very nicely. Next up for the Malayans, we've got Gebeto, SO for Rimba Camel. Really sick composition using the Gebeto as the DPS units. It's quite squishy, so make sure you're protecting it nicely, but it does a lot of damage. So Gebeto, Siege Onager, of course, with the Malayans. You missed out on Siege Engineer, but it's still a pretty strong option. And then Rimba Camel to defend against heavy cavalry. Also recommend you use Bomber Cannons or Trebs to take out buildings. Great composition there for the Malayans. Next up, we've got the Mayans, and Mayans are going to go with Elite Eagle Warrior with the unique technology, El Dorado, giving them an extra 40 HP. Following that up, we're going to have Plumed Archers, and then Siege Ram or Trebuchet for the Siege. Eagles and Plumes are a great composition. Your only weakness is heavy cavalry, so if that comes in, make sure to mix in some Halberdier or some Monks to help out. But I think Eagle Plumes will pretty much kill everything else. They're so cheap, those units as well. They are heavy on the gold price, but everything else is pretty cheap, and so they're quite affordable should you have the gold in store. Next up, we've got the Mongols, and for the Mongols, we've got Mangudai, Esso, and Trebuchets. I mean, Mangudai are alone a deathball composition. Mixing in siege onagers, especially for Mongols, using that drill technology in the late game, making them move faster. Oh, it's just such an insane composition. So fun to play with as well. If you need a melee unit, just a little buffer unit, which sometimes you don't because Mangudai are just that insane, I recommend just mixing in some Hussar. You don't need to do anything fancy with the Mongols. Let the Mangudai Esso do the trick, and just some Hussar with extra HP to tank can be useful as well. Next up, we've got the Persians, and I'm just going to go for it here. It's going to be War Elephant plus Trash Bow. And I also recommend you mix in some Hussar for this one specifically, because the biggest weakness for War Elephant Trash Bow is monks. So having Hussar in the composition to snipe monks is a great way to defend those War Elephants and make sure that they can do the trick of pushing. I also recommend for siege, you mix in either siege ram or bomber cannons. Siege ram to really dive in and push with the elephants, or bomber cannons if you want to take it a little bit slower. Next up, we've got the Poles. Now, the Poles actually have a really nice deathball composition. We're going to forget completely about their cavalry, even though that's probably one of their biggest strengths, I should say, in open maps. But for the Poles, the deathball composition is actually Arbalest plus Obuk. Obuch, or however you say it, are incredibly strong as a front line, and then having Arbalest behind them is a great composition. Dies to very little things, and then of course bomber cannons as the siege can be a great option. You can also mix in some monks if needed to round out the composition. I will also add that winged hussar are an option to spam because those are really good, but they're not going to be your main units for a deathball. Next up, we've got the Portuguese. Now, Portuguese are going to rely strictly on gunpowder. It's going to be organ gun and bomber cannon. Remember, with their unique technology, their gunpowder has ballistics. So the organ guns have a ton of DPS. The bomber cannons can snipe units very easily. And if you need a frontline unit, I recommend you go with the tried and tested Cavalier. Might seem a bit underwhelming, but the cheap Cavalier for Portuguese are actually very good. So it ends up being a very nice composition overall. Next up, we've got the Saracens, one of my personal favorites on the list. It's going to be, you got it, Mamelukes as the main unit, followed up with Siege Onagers and Trebuchets. Such a powerful composition. Again, it's just something that dies to very little other things. And yeah, you basically have no weakness there. If you want to mix in some Hussars to snipe monks, which could be annoying since Mamelukes have very short range, it could be a good option. So Hussar kind of in brackets there for that comp. Incredibly strong deathball there for the Saracens. Next up, we got the Sicilians. Now, Sicilians are going to use Halberdier and Sergeant, a little bit of a mix there for the front line, and then using Esso and Trebuchet as the siege in the back line. Siege Onagers will kill pretty much everything, and then Trebuchets to siege down buildings is a great idea. I will also give you guys a little side note. I'm pretty sure Sergeants are incredibly underrated. It's such a strong unit stat-wise, and it's not too expensive either. So Sergeant's Halb can be a great option with Sicilians. Next up, we've got the Slavs, and for Slavs, we keep it nice and simple here. Droshina Halb plus Siege, and for the Siege, I recommend you go with Siege Onagers or Heavy Scorpions for the DPS one, and then Trebuchets to take out buildings are going to be a great option. You'll notice a lot of Siege mixed in with most of these deathball compositions. It's just how it is. If you want to sit in one spot, Siege is the best unit to use because it's slow, but it's damn powerful. Next up, we've got the Spanish, and for the Spanish, we're going to use Conquistador as the main unit, but we're going to mix in Inquisition monks. They convert super fast. You can also mix in some donkeys if you want to with the monk army, and then just a little bit of a front line with Paladin, and then Trebs from the back line. You can also mix in some bomber cannons as well. So the Spanish composition is going to look something like Conquistador, Paladin, Monk, Treb, Bomber Cannon, a little bit of everything in there, but it ends up being incredibly strong once you get there. Moving on now, we got the Tatars, and for this civilization, I like to go with the 18 range trebuchets, 1 extra range from siege engineers, and 1 extra range from their unique technology in Imperial Age. And just to defend these trebuchets that are firing from so far away, we're going to use heavy cav archers and Keshik. Make sure you get the Casted unique technology to give extra armor to the cav archers, and Keshik can generate some gold while fighting, which is always really nice. Amazing composition here for the Tatars. A fan favorite coming up, we've got the Teutons, and for the Teutons, I recommend using Halberdier and, wait for it, Teutonic Knights as the front line. Halb Teutonic Knights are incredible when paired together. Halberdier can be a little bit faster than Teutonic Knights to help deal with cavalry, and Teutonic Knights will push through pretty much everything else. The only weakness is range units, and for that, we're going to use Ironclad Siege Onagers, mixing in also some Bomber Cannons to help deal with that. So Bomber Cannon SO will be our backline here, and then Halb Teutonic Knights as the buffer and kind of that frontline army. So strong for Teutons. You can even mix in Paladin if you want to. I prefer going with infantry if I want to slow push. Next up, we got the Turks, and for the Turks, it's really quite simple. I actually played with this composition today. It's very flexible. It's going to be heavy CA, Hussar, and Bomber Cannon. It might seem weird that you're using a mobile army to act as your death ball, but heavy CA and Hussar for Turks are both incredibly tanky. The heavy CA has 100 HP thanks to the Castell's unique tech, giving it an extra 20, and the Hussar has an extra pierce armor. So both of these units are so tanky and so flexible. And then the 14 range Bomber Cannons from the backline, incredibly strong for the Turks. Very hard to deal with this army, and it's so flexible, so versatile, and so powerful. Next up, we've got the Vietnamese, and for the Vietnamese, I also played with this composition very recently. It's the Rattan Archer plus elephants, battle elephants, Rattan Archer, such a strong death ball comp. And for the siege, we're gonna go ahead and use bombard cannons. I just love the bombard cannons in the backline, as you guys might have figured by now. But the Rattan Archer elephant is such a powerful composition. It acts really good as a defensive, camping your siege kind of comp. But you can also push in with the battle elephant and the Rattan Archer behind them, because the Rattan Archer are really tanky. They can tank arrow fire from a castle quite nicely because they have 10 pierce armor. So don't be afraid to run in with your elephants and just take out buildings and take out your opponent's army and castles alike. And for the last civilization on the list, we've got the Vikings. Now the Vikings was a hard one to come up with, but I landed on Berserks plus Heavy Scorpion plus Trebuchet. This composition is probably the most vulnerable out of all the deathball comps, but Vikings don't really have that many options to begin with. However, Berserkers with Heavy Scorpion is pretty good. You cover a lot of your weaknesses there. However, I will say you kind of die to ESO. You kind of die to Siege Onagers with Vikings. There's not much you can do about that, so that's your big weakness. But otherwise, Berserker Heavy Scorpion with Trebuchets is going to be a great composition overall versus most other things. Alright guys, that's going to do it for the deathball composition, or the best deathball composition for every civilization in Age of Empires 2. This video took a lot of work, so I really hope this helped, and I really hope you guys enjoyed it. Be sure to smash the like button down below and subscribe for more content like this. And I will also be making a top 5 best deathball composition video, just so you know, out of all of these 42 civilizations, which are the 5 best that you can rely on for your games. Thanks for watching guys, and I'll see you in the next one. Peace!